When the news hit me that I wasn't welcome at my own son's anniversary dinner, a dinner in a house I largely paid for, I didn't yell. I didn't even argue. I just smiled, a tight, grim thing that didn't reach my eyes, and walked out. By the time the mortgage payment for their mansion was due next month, I'd make sure that smile was etched onto their faces, a grim reminder of justice. That was just the beginning. Arrogance, especially when it bleeds you dry, has a funny way of coming back to bite. You know, I used to believe in foundations, not just the concrete kind, though I poured enough of those to build half a river band. I mean the kind you build a family on: trust, respect, gratitude. I was Arthur Hayes, a brick and mortar man, literally. Started Hayes Construction from scratch, just me, a beat-up pickup and a dream. Put in 40 years, watch this town grow from sleepy farmland to sprawling suburbs, build homes for folks who'd shake your hand and look you in the eye. When my late wife, Clara, bless her soul, passed a few years back, I thought my job was done. Handed the reins of the business to my son David. Thought I'd earned a quiet retirement, maybe some fishing, time with the grandkids. Simple dreams for a simple man, right? But simple dreams don't always fit into a fancy suburban mansion, especially when that mansion was pretty much built on my back. See, David, he's a good kid deep down, or at least he used to be. After he married Ashley Sterling, everything shifted. Ashley, well, she's from money. Old money, she'd remind you, with that tight little smile. Her parents, Richard and Eleanor Sterling, were the kind of folks who measured a man by his zip code and his college degree, not the calluses on his hands. They never quite approved of me. A builder? Just a tradesman in their eyes. Someone who worked with his hands, not his mind. And David, my own flesh and blood, started seeing me through their eyes. It began subtly, little nudges about how I dressed, hints about my less refined table manners, questions about why I didn't invest in more sophisticated hobbies. I swallowed it, for David, for Clara's memory, because she always wanted him to have the best. And what they didn't know, what they refused to acknowledge, was that their best was my blood, sweat, and tears. Their sprawling 5-bedroom, 4-bath palace in Riverbend, the one with the granite countertops and the manicured lawn, that wasn't built on David's mid-level corporate salary. It was built on the hefty down payment I pulled from my retirement savings, the monthly mortgage payments I'd been quietly making for 5 years, the renovations that emptied my credit cards. Ashley's gleaming new SUV? My money. David's fancy golf club membership? Mine too. They lived like royalty, hosting lavish parties, constantly redecorating, upgrading, expanding. And I just kept signing checks, watching the numbers drain from my account while they showed off their success. I used to go over every Sunday. Just me, bringing a casserole or some ribs, hoping for some normal family time. David would be polite, distant mostly. Ashley, though, she was a different story. Always with the thinly veiled comments. "Oh, Arthur, your kind of cooking is certainly robust." Or, "It's so quaint how you still enjoy those old classic rock stations, Dad. We've moved on to classical and jazz, much more suitable for entertaining." Sometimes I'd sit there on their expensive leather couch, a couch I'd probably paid for too, and just watch them. Watch Ashley breeze through the kitchen with her fancy coffee machine I bought, talking about her latest charity gala or her book club. Watch David nod along, not really listening, not really seeing me. I was just the ATM, a walk-in, breathe-in ATM with inconvenient emotions. It weighed on me, that feeling of being an outsider in my own son's life, in a house that was technically mine, piece by piece. My old house, the one Clara and I built our lives in, it felt hollow without her laughter. And I couldn't even afford to fix the leaky roof or the cracked driveway because every spare dime went into their American dream. It was a strange kind of invisible burden, a secret weight I carried, watching my life's work dissipate into their extravagant lifestyle. They talked about traditions, about their way of doing things, but I realized their tradition was simply taking, and their way was simply to look down on anyone who wasn't like them. I knew deep down that this couldn't last forever. Something had to give. And what they didn't realize was the foundation they were standing on was about to crack. When the text message flashed across my phone screen, "Dad, unfortunately, you won't be welcome here for Christmas." I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. I just smiled. A chilling, unsettling kind of smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I walked straight to my old Ford F-150, the one I'd driven to every single job site for 40 years, and made one call. By the new year, their shiny, perfect Riverbend life was going to have a very significant crack in its foundation. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. And trust me, arrogance, especially the kind that thinks it's above a working man like me, tends to self-destruct. You know, I used to believe in foundations. Not just the concrete slabs I poured, that bedrock of countless homes across this very town of Riverbend. I mean the kind you build a family on: trust, respect, gratitude. My name's Arthur Hayes, a brick and mortar man through and through. Started Hayes Construction from scratch, just me, a beat-up pickup, and a dream. I built this town piece by piece, from the ground up, watching it transform from sleepy farmland into sprawling suburbs. I laid foundations for families, for businesses, for futures. I built homes for folks who'd look you in the eye, shake your hand hard, and mean every word. When my late wife Clara, bless her soul, passed a few years back, I thought my job was done. I'd earned my stripes. Handed the reins of the business to my only son, David. Thought I'd finally earned a quiet retirement, maybe some fishing down by the old creek, time with the grandkids I barely saw. Simple dreams for a simple man, right? Just wanted to kick back on my own porch swing, listening to the cicadas, maybe catch a Mariners game on the radio. But those simple dreams don't quite fit into a fancy suburban mansion, especially when that mansion was, ironically, built on my back. See, David, he's a good kid, deep down, or at least he used to be. But after he married Ashley Sterling, everything shifted, like cheap drywall after a good rain. Ashley, she's from money. Old money, she'd remind you, with that tight, almost imperceptible little smirk, the kind that spoke volumes without saying a word. Her parents, Richard and Eleanor Sterling, they were the quintessential country club set. The kind of folks who measured a man by his zip code, his Ivy League degree, and his trust fund, not the calluses on his hands or the sweat on his brow. They never quite approved of me. A builder? Oh, how quaint, I heard Eleanor once whisper to a friend at a fundraiser Ashley dragged me to. Just a tradesman in their eyes, someone who worked with his hands, not his mind. And David, my own flesh and blood, started seeing me through their eyes too. It started subtly, little prods about my worn-out jeans, hints about my less refined table manners at Sunday dinners, thinly veiled questions about why I didn't invest in more sophisticated hobbies like yachting or collecting rare art, I suppose. I swallowed it, every single bitter pill, for David, for Clara's memory, because she always wanted him to have the best. And what they didn't know, what they refused to acknowledge, was that their best was my blood, sweat, and tears. Their sprawling 5-bedroom, 4-bath palace in Riverbend, the one with the granite countertops Isabella insisted on, and the perfectly manicured lawn that probably cost more than my first house, that wasn't built on David's mid-level corporate salary. Oh no, it was built on the hefty down payment I pulled from my retirement savings, the fund Clara and I had dreamed of traveling on. It was built on the monthly mortgage payments I'd been quietly making for 5 years, every single one. It was built on the renovations that emptied my credit cards, leaving me to ration groceries. Ashley's gleaming new Lexus SUV? My money. David's exclusive golf club membership, the one he used to network with important people? Mine too. They lived like royalty, hosting lavish parties, constantly redecorating, upgrading, expanding. And I just kept signing checks, watching the numbers drain from my account while they strutted around, showing off their success, their hard work. I used to go over every Sunday, just me bringing a casserole or some ribs, hoping for some normal family time. A quiet evening, maybe David and I could talk about football or the old days. But it never happened. David would be polite, distant, always a little on edge, like he was waiting for Ashley to give him the cue. Ashley, though, she was a different story. Always with the thinly veiled comments. "Oh, Arthur, your kind of cooking is certainly robust. We prefer something more delicate now." Or, "It's so quaint how you still enjoy those old classic rock stations, Dad. We've moved on to classical and jazz, much more suitable for entertaining. You know, for people of our standing." Sometimes I'd sit there on their expensive leather couch, a couch I'd probably paid for too, and just watch them. Watch Ashley breeze through the kitchen with her fancy espresso machine I bought, talking about her latest charity gala or her book club, always name-dropping. Watch David nod along, not really listening, not really seeing me. I was just the ATM. A walking, breathing ATM with inconvenient emotions that apparently didn't fit their narrative of success. It weighed on me, that feeling of being an outsider in my own son's life, in a house that was technically mine, piece by piece. My old house, the one Clara and I built our lives in, it felt hollow without her laughter. And I couldn't even afford to fix the leaky roof or the cracked driveway, the one my truck sat on, covered in a fine layer of riverbend dust, because every spare dime went into their American dream. It was a strange kind of invisible burden, a secret weight I carried, watching my life's work dissipate into their extravagant lifestyle. They talked about traditions, about their way of doing things, but I realized their tradition was simply taken, and their way was simply to look down on anyone who wasn't like them. I knew deep down that this couldn't last forever. Something had to give. And what they didn't realize was the foundation they were standing on was about to crack, and I was holding the sledgehammer. You might think that after that Christmas Eve exchange, I'd have crumpled, thrown myself a pity party, maybe bought a cheap bottle of bourbon and watched old movies. But that's not how Arthur Hayes operates. My first wife, Clara, used to say I was like an old oak tree, slow to grow but impossible to uproot. And what Ashley and David didn't understand was they'd just hit me with an axe, but I was still standing, and I was about to fall on their house. The anger, that burning humiliation, it didn't fester, it solidified. It became fuel. My first order of business was simple: cut the bleeding. For years, every spare dollar, every penny I'd put aside for a rainy day, for a trip Clara and I had dreamed of to see the Grand Canyon, it all vanished into their perfectly manicured suburban fantasy. I pulled out every bank statement, every transfer record, every canceled check. $2,800 every month for 5 years straight, just for the mortgage. That was on top of the down payment, the renovations, the appliances, the furniture they needed. I had a manila folder fat enough to choke a horse, filled with evidence of my own stupidity, as I used to call it. Now, it was just evidence. $143,400 just in mortgage payments alone, not counting the $47,000 down payment, not counting the $18,000 for Ashley's essential granite countertops. It was over $250,000, more than Clara and I had saved for our entire retirement. All of it just gone. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, my old Formica table, looking at those numbers until they blurred. Maria's life insurance money, my retirement savings, even the college fund Clara and I started for grandchildren I'd apparently never be allowed to see, poured into a house where I wasn't welcome for Christmas dinner. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built a business from nothing, employed over 50 people, paid more in taxes than Richard Sterling probably made in his best year, and here I was eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch to make ends meet, while they lived like royalty on my dime. That was the moment it truly sank in. I wasn't just being taken advantage of, I was being erased. The next morning, I called my bank. The automated system offered me options in English and Spanish, so accommodating. I chose English. When the customer service rep, Jennifer, finally got on the line, my voice was steadier than it had been in years. "I need to cancel an automatic transfer," I told her. She was professional, efficient, no judgment about why a 62-year-old man was canceling payments to what was probably his son's mortgage. She confirmed the details. $2,800 monthly to Wells Fargo, account ending in 7423. How long have you been making this transfer? 5 years, I said, the words tasting bitter but also liberating. And you want to cancel it effective immediately? She asked. I looked around my own kitchen, at the outdated appliances I couldn't afford to replace, the walls that needed painting, the windows that leaked cold air because I'd spent my home improvement money on someone else's castle. Effective immediately, I confirmed. The silence that followed her, "Done, the transfer has been canceled," was the most beautiful sound I'd heard in a long time. That night, for the first time in 5 years, next month's budget would balance. I could afford to fix my porch light, buy decent groceries, maybe even take a real vacation. I gathered up all the bank statements, the mortgage papers, all the proof of my quiet martyrdom. I walked to my fireplace, struck a match, and watched 5 years of being a doormat turn to ash. The fire felt warm on my face, warmer than I'd felt in years. My phone buzzed with a text, probably David or Ashley, needing something essential. I didn't check it. Instead, I poured myself a glass of the good whiskey, the bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion that never seemed to come. Tonight felt special enough. I raised my glass to the empty room, to Clara's photo on the mantel, to the man I used to be, and the man I was finally becoming. "Merry Christmas to me," I said, and I meant it. The freedom tasted better than any expensive coffee or fine wine they ever served in Riverbend. The next morning, the crisp December sunlight felt different, sharper, as I nursed my second cup of coffee. For the first time in years, I wasn't doing mental arithmetic, calculating how much money would vanish from my account in 3 days. The freedom tasted better than any fancy Colombian blend I'd finally allowed myself to buy. It tasted like liberation. My phone rang at exactly 10:47 a.m. Ashley's name flashed on the screen, like a warning label, or perhaps a well-timed cue. I let it ring, watching the steam curl from my mug. On the 4th ring, I picked up, letting her stew just long enough to wonder if I'd answer at all. "Bennis," her voice dripped with that familiar false sweetness, the same tone she used when asking me to cover their water bill or property taxes. "I heard about the little misunderstanding with Michael." Misunderstanding? I leaned against my kitchen counter, still wearing my coat. "I don't think there's any misunderstanding, Ashley. You made your position quite clear." There was a beat of silence. Then she launched into it, a torrent of barely concealed impatience. "Look, I know this seems harsh, but you have to understand my parents' perspective. They're very traditional people. They expect a certain atmosphere during the holidays." "A certain atmosphere," I repeated slowly. "And what atmosphere is that?" I could hear shopping bags rustling in the background, probably spending money that should have gone to their mortgage payment, money that was, apparently, my responsibility. Then came the real punch. "Well, they're not used to your kind of cooking, all that spicy Mexican food and loud music. And frankly, Dennis, they're educated people. They expect conversations about current events, literature, art, you know." 8 years of biting my tongue, swallowing insults for Michael's sake, pretending not to notice the way she looked at me like I was hired help, it all surged. My kind of cooking. My voice stayed level, controlled. You mean the food you ate every Sunday for 3 years when money was tight? The tamales you said reminded you of your grandmother? That was different, she snapped, the false sweetness evaporating. We were appreciative then, but now with my parents... Now, with your parents, I finished for her, you can't have the Mexican peasant embarrassing you at your fancy dinner table. Don't be dramatic, Dennis. This isn't about race, it's about class. My father graduated summa cum laude from Washington State. My mother speaks 4 languages. They summer in the Hamptons. What exactly would you contribute to dinner conversation? Stories about laying tile? The heat flooded my chest, but I kept my voice steady, my grip on the phone tightening. I built a business from nothing after your husband's grandfather died. I've employed over 50 people. I've paid more in taxes than your father made in his best year. Money isn't everything, Dennis. Breeding matters. Education matters. And frankly, Maria understood her place better than you understand yours. That was it. That was the line I didn't even know existed until she'd stomped across it in her designer heels. My wife, Clara, dragged into this, diminished. What did you say about my wife? I asked, my voice dropping to something I didn't recognize. I'm just saying she knew how to blend in better. She didn't make waves. She understood that some spaces weren't meant for her. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles went white. Clara had more class in her little finger than your entire bloodline will ever possess, I spat back. Oh, please, she was a house cleaner who got lucky. At least she had the good sense to stay quiet about it. Ashley, my voice was a low growl now, I want you to listen very carefully. This conversation is over. We're done pretending to be family. You can't just... We're done, I repeated and ended the call. I set the phone down carefully on the counter, my hands surprisingly steady. Around me, the kitchen felt different, smaller, but somehow cleaner, like a weight had been lifted from the air itself. The next stage was set. Not by me, not directly. I received a text from Ashley the following morning, then a call from Richard Sterling, Ashley's father, asking about the mix-up with the mortgage payment. He even dropped a subtle thread about his connections in the Spokane business community, insinuating that my reputation might suffer if I didn't play ball. I just listened, calmly. This wasn't a mix-up, and it certainly wasn't about playing ball. It was about principle. And their outrage? It was a delicious appetizer for the main course I was preparing. They had just thrown the first stone, and I was about to build a monument with them. 3 days later, I was sipping my morning coffee, enjoying the newfound quiet of my home, when I saw my own face staring back at me from page 3 of the Riverbend Review. The headline screamed, "Prominent builder abandons elderly couple at airport during holiday storm." My hands went still around the mug. There I was, an old photo from my company's website, probably 5 years out of date. Below it, a story that made my blood run cold and my temper flare in equal measure. Richard and Eleanor Sterling, visiting their daughter for Christmas, were left stranded at Riverbend International Airport for over 4 hours when family member Arthur Hayes failed to appear for a prearranged pickup. The article painted a picture of helpless victims. The couple, both in their late 60s, waited in frigid temperatures as a winter storm warning was issued for the region, it claimed. Frigid temperatures? Winter storm warning? It had been 52 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny that day. "We couldn't believe someone would just abandon us like that," Richard Sterling was quoted saying. "We called repeatedly, but Mr. Hayes never answered his phone. We were forced to take an expensive taxi in dangerous weather conditions. At our age, this kind of treatment is not just inconsiderate, it's dangerous." The article went on, with quotes about my pattern of erratic behavior and concerns about my mental state. Richard had painted himself and Eleanor as helpless victims of a cruel old man who'd suddenly snapped without provocation. No mention of the Christmas dinner rejection, no context about Ashley's demands or their years of financial exploitation. Just me, the villain who abandoned poor elderly tourists during a blizzard that existed only in Richard's imagination. I sat my coffee down and read the article again, slowly, then a third time. The byline belonged to some local lifestyle editor, Patricia Morrison. I didn't recognize the name, but I recognized the strategy. Richard had called in favors, used his banking connections to get this story placed exactly where it would do maximum damage to my reputation. Smart, very smart. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt a grudging respect for my opponents. They weren't just entitled trust fund babies throwing tantrums. They were strategic, calculating. They understood that in a small city like Riverbend, reputation was everything. One well-placed newspaper article could destroy decades of hard work. They had just declared total war. I folded the newspaper carefully and set it aside, my mind already shifting into the methodical planning mode that had built Hayes Construction from nothing. This wasn't about airport pickups anymore. This wasn't about Christmas dinner or mortgage payments. This was about winning. I pulled out my laptop and began typing names into search engines. Richard Sterling, Eleanor Sterling, Ashley Hayes, David Hayes. Their social media profiles, their connections, their habits, their weaknesses. Everything they'd foolishly made public over the years. If they wanted to play chess, I'd show them what a real strategist looked like. I glanced at my wall calendar. December 18th. 7 days until Christmas. 7 days to plan something they'd never forget. I spent the next 3 days living in a different world. Not the world where I was Arthur Hayes, the broken-down old man who let his family walk all over him. This was the world where I was Arthur Hayes, businessman, strategic thinker, someone who'd built something from nothing and wasn't about to let a bunch of entitled parasites destroy what I'd worked 40 years to build. My laptop became command central. Social media profiles filled my browser tabs like playing cards in a high-stakes game. Richard Sterling, retired First National Bank manager, member of the prestigious Riverbend Country Club, treasurer of the Inland Northwest Business Leaders Association, a man who'd spent his career in positions of trust and influence, a man with a lot to lose. Eleanor's Instagram painted a perfect picture of refined living. Charity luncheons, exclusive wine tastings, vacation photos from Lake Coeur d'Alene tagged with #BlessedLife. Every post carefully curated to project success and sophistication. Comments from friends praising her elegant taste and inspiring lifestyle. All of it built on other people's money, including mine. Ashley's Facebook timeline told the real story. Posts about our beautiful home with photos of the kitchen I'd paid for. Check-ins at expensive restaurants during the months when I'd covered their utility bills. A status update from last week. So excited for Christmas dinner with family. Can't wait to show off our hosting skills. Our home. Our success. The narcissism was breathtaking. But it was David's LinkedIn profile that gave me the final piece I needed. His recent activity showed a new connection. Patricia Morrison, lifestyle editor at the Riverbend Review. The same Patricia Morrison who'd written the hatchet job about me. I leaned back in my desk chair, looking at the evidence spread across my screen. These people had made 3 critical mistakes. First, they'd underestimated me completely. Second, they'd gone public with their attack, which meant I could go public with my response. Third, they documented their entire privileged lifestyle online, creating a perfect catalog of hypocrisy. I clicked through to Patricia Morrison's profile. 43 years old, journalism degree from WSU, 15 years at local papers, no previous connection to banking or finance, which meant Richard had reached out cold, probably through someone he knew from his business network. A 5-minute search through local business directories confirmed my suspicion. 3 mutual connections between Richard and Patricia's editor. The story hadn't just appeared. It had been planted, carefully and deliberately. Amateur hour. I opened a new document and began typing. Not a response to their media attack, something much better. A timeline. 5 years of financial support, documented with bank statements, receipts, and canceled checks. The down payment for their house, $47,000 from my home equity loan. The kitchen renovation when Ashley decided granite countertops were essential, $18,000 from my credit card. 60 monthly mortgage payments of $2,800 each, $168,000 and counting. $250,000, more than I'd spent on myself in the last decade. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Probably Ashley, trying a new angle. I ignored it and kept working. By evening, I had everything organized in a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. Bank statements, receipts, photos downloaded from their social media showing off purchases I'd funded. A printed copy of the newspaper article with my handwritten notes in the margins documenting each lie and distortion. I looked at my wall calendar. December 24th was circled in red, not because it was Christmas, but because it was the perfect day for justice. According to Ashley's Facebook events, they were hosting Christmas dinner for 12 people. Family, friends, neighbors, members of their social circle. The kind of people who read the Riverbend Review and form opinions based on what they saw there. The kind of people who deserved to know the truth. I closed my laptop and walked to my kitchen, where I'd left my good camera, the one I'd bought years ago to document job sites for my business. Time to put it to work documenting something else entirely. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve. Tomorrow, Richard Sterling and his family were going to learn what happened when you declare war on someone who actually knows how to fight. The quiet anticipation in my gut felt like a coiled spring ready to snap. Christmas Eve morning dawned gray and cold, the kind of Riverbend winter day that made you grateful for warm houses and family gatherings. Too bad I wouldn't be welcome at either, but I had other plans. I laid out my evidence like a seasoned prosecutor preparing for a high-stakes trial. Bank statements organized by year, each monthly payment highlighted in fluorescent yellow. Receipts arranged chronologically, showing the meticulous pattern of my financial support for their lavish lifestyle. Photos printed from their social media, blown up just enough to see the details. Ashley's new diamond pendant, their lavish vacation to the Caribbean, the absurdly expensive Christmas decorations currently adorning their house, a house I'd helped them keep. I'd copied each packet 12 times, one for each dinner guest. The newspaper article with Richard's fabricated story went on top of each stack, my red pen notes visible in the margins. Lie next to Cody's quotes about dangerous weather. False beside the claim about my erratic behavior. Missing context, highlighted where they'd conveniently failed to mention 5 years of continuous financial support. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the navy blue one I'd worn to Clara's funeral, pressed and ready for another kind of farewell. Today, I was saying goodbye to the man who'd been a doormat for his family. Tonight, I'd be someone who commanded respect. At 6:30 p.m., I loaded my briefcase with the evidence packets and drove to Kendall Yards, a newer, upscale neighborhood in Riverbend, where David and Ashley's mansion glowed with warm light. Cars already filled their circular driveway and lined the street, glittering like a car dealership display. Through the grand front windows, I could see figures moving around the dining room, Ashley playing the perfect hostess, gliding through the very home my money had helped them buy. I parked across the street and checked my watch. 6:45, perfect timing. Late enough that everyone would be seated for dinner, early enough that they'd still be on the main course, no easy escape for anyone. The front door was unlocked. Of course it was. Ashley loved to show off how safe their neighborhood was, how they didn't need to worry about security, unlike people in rougher areas. I let myself in quietly, the warm air hitting my face along with the sounds of laughter and conversation from the dining room. I heard a snippet, "But darling, that's not how we do things in our family," someone was saying, followed by more laughter. Our family, after everything they'd done to exclude me from it? I walked into the dining room carrying my briefcase, and it was like someone had hit the mute button on the entire room. 12 faces, a mix of old money and new ambition, turned toward me with expressions ranging from surprise to outright horror. Ashley froze, her wine glass halfway to her lips, a perfect crimson stain waiting to happen. David's face went pale, like he'd seen a ghost. Richard and Eleanor Sterling, seated at the head of the long polished table, looked like they'd just swallowed lemons. "Good evening, everyone," I said calmly, my voice resonating with a quiet authority I hadn't used in years. I set my briefcase on their marble sideboard, the same marble I'd paid for, with a soft thud that echoed in the silence. "I hope you don't mind me joining your Christmas celebration." Ashley found her voice first, her tone strained, laced with barely concealed fury. "Arthur, this is completely inappropriate. You need to leave immediately." "Actually," I said, unlatching my briefcase and pulling out the first stack of papers, "I think your guests deserve to know who really paid for this dinner, this house, and this lifestyle you've been showing off." A woman I didn't recognize, probably one of Eleanor's charity friends, leaned forward with morbid curiosity. "What is he talking about, Ashley?" "He's having some kind of episode," Ashley said quickly, her eyes wide with panic. "David, call someone." But I was already moving around the table, placing a neatly stacked packet of documents in front of each guest. "Here are the bank records," I said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. 5 years of financial support, $168,000 in mortgage payments alone, plus the down payment, renovations, furniture, appliances, everything you see around you. The room went silent, save for the rustling of papers, as 12 people, dressed in their finest holiday attire, began examining the evidence. I watched their faces change as they absorbed the numbers, the dates, the undeniable proof of my generosity and David and Ashley's deception. "This is," one man started, a prominent lawyer I recognized from local news, then stopped, staring at a bank statement with a bewildered expression. "Outrageous," finished the woman across from him, her voice a sharp whisper. "Ashley, why didn't you tell us any of this?" Ashley's perfect composure was cracking, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool room. "It's more complicated than it looks. Arthur volunteered to help us. We never asked." "Actually," I interrupted, pulling out the infamous newspaper article, "let's talk about what you did ask for and what you told the media about me." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I placed copies of the newspaper article on the table, watching as the dinner guests recognized my photo from the unflattering story that had run 3 days earlier. "Now," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden suffocating silence, "let's talk about the real manipulators in this family." Richard Sterling's face had gone from red to ashen. Eleanor sat rigid in her chair, her wine glass forgotten in her trembling hand. "Mr. Sterling here used his banking connections to plant this story," I continued, tapping the newspaper with my finger. "Notice how I'm portrayed as unstable and dangerous, abandoning poor elderly people in freezing weather." A gray-haired man in an expensive cashmere sweater, an old acquaintance of Richard's, looked up from the article, his brow furrowed. "Richard, what is this about? The weather was 52 degrees and sunny yesterday." "And they weren't stranded tourists," I added, before Richard could even stammer a reply. "They were Ashley's parents, coming to the Christmas dinner I'd been banned from attending because I wasn't good enough for their company." Eleanor finally found her voice, a strangled, indignant sound. "We never said—" "You never said what, Eleanor?" I pulled out my phone, where I'd screenshotted several of Ashley's social media posts. "That I was too low class for your parents? That my Mexican food and working class conversation would embarrass you in front of your educated friends?" The woman I'd identified as one of Eleanor's charity friends shifted uncomfortably, her gaze fixed on Ashley. "Ashley, surely you didn't." "He's twisting everything," Richard blustered, but his voice lacked conviction, his eyes darting frantically around the room. "This man has serious mental health issues, the stress of aging, financial problems." "Financial problems?" I almost laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Mr. Sterling, I've been supporting your daughter and son-in-law to the tune of nearly $3,000 a month for 5 years. The only financial problems here are the ones you're about to have." I turned to address the entire table, making sure everyone met my gaze. "These people have taken over $200,000 from me while calling me names behind my back. They've manipulated my son against me, banned me from family gatherings, and when I finally stood up for myself, they tried to destroy my reputation in the newspaper." David spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper, his face a mixture of shock and dawning horror. "Dad, I didn't know about the newspaper." "Your wife knew," I said quietly, my gaze piercing him. "And her parents orchestrated it. They turned me into a villain for refusing to be their personal ATM and chauffeur." The social dynamic in the room was shifting like tectonic plates. I could see it in the guests' faces, the gradual realization that everything they'd been told about tonight's generous, sophisticated hosts was built on a towering stack of lies. "This is unconscionable," said the elderly woman in pearls, staring at the bank statements, her face a mask of disgust. "Richard, how could you let your daughter take advantage of this man's generosity, then attack him publicly when he stopped enabling it?" Richard's carefully maintained facade was crumbling, his face an alarming shade of purple. "You don't understand the full situation," he stammered. "I understand perfectly," the woman interrupted, cutting him off with a sharp wave of her hand. "This man has been supporting your family financially while you treated him like hired help, and when he finally said no, you tried to ruin his reputation." Eleanor's voice came out strangled. "He abandoned us at the airport. After you told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas dinner because my presence would be inappropriate for your parents," I said calmly, my voice steady and clear for all to hear. "After 5 years of paying their bills while you looked down on me for my ethnicity and education level." The silence that followed was deafening. 12 people, pillars of the Riverbend community, stared at Richard, Eleanor, and Ashley with expressions ranging from disgust to sheer embarrassment for having associated with them. Ashley made one last desperate attempt to control the narrative. "Everyone, please, this is a family matter that's gotten out of hand." "No," I said firmly, my voice cutting through her plea. "This stopped being a family matter when you made it public, when you used the newspaper to attack my character, when you decided my reputation was acceptable collateral damage for your pride." I looked around the table at faces I didn't recognize, but who now knew exactly who I was. "I wanted you all to know the truth before you read about Arthur Hayes in the paper again, because you will read about me again. But next time, it'll be the real story." I closed my briefcase with a definitive click that echoed through the stunned room and straightened my tie. "Enjoy the rest of your dinner," I said, my gaze sweeping over David, who was now staring at the floor, utterly defeated. "It's the last one I'll be paying for." As I walked slowly toward the door, I could hear the eruption beginning behind me. Voices raised in accusation, questions demanding answers, the sound of a carefully constructed social facade falling apart, piece by agonizing piece. It was the most beautiful Christmas music I'd ever heard. The letter arrived on the Tuesday morning in March, delivered by certified mail, with the weight of legal consequences behind every word. I signed for it at my front door, noting how the spring air smelled of new growth and possibility instead of the winter desperation that had marked those dark December days.
Notice of default, the envelope read. Final demand for payment? Inside, 3 months of missed mortgage payments had caught up with David and Ashley like a tsunami of reality. $8,400 in arrears, 14 days to bring the account current or face foreclosure proceedings on the house I'd helped them buy. I set the letter aside and returned to my coffee, reading it the way you'd read news about a distant weather phenomenon. Interesting, but not my problem anymore.
The phone had been ringing for weeks with increasingly desperate calls. Ashley's number was blocked after the first hysterical voicemail, a raw, screeching sound I barely recognized. Then came Richard and Eleanor Sterling. Their social standing in Riverbend had evaporated like morning mist after their Christmas dinner humiliation. I imagined their golf games suddenly much quieter, their charity luncheons attended by fewer familiar faces. Richard, the man who'd boasted about his connections, now found himself utterly disconnected from the very circles he so desperately clung to. Eleanor's Instagram, once a testament to #blessed life and #gracious living, had gone silent. No more perfectly filtered photos of wine tastings or exclusive galas. Their carefully constructed world had imploded, and the silence from their end was, in its own way, a profound kind of music to my ears. Even David's calls, which I'd been ignoring out of a mixture of anger and a curious anticipation of how long it would take him to swallow his pride, had grown more frequent. Each ring was a reminder of the unraveling. I didn't take any pleasure in their downfall, not in a cruel way, but there was a deep, quiet satisfaction in seeing the scales finally balance. They had banked on my generosity, on my quiet nature, on the assumption that I would always be there to pick up the pieces, to pay their way, to endure their disdain. Now they were on their own, facing a reality I'd been living for years, a reality without a safety net of old man's money. It was harsh, yes, but it was just. And in the stillness of my own newly debt-free home, I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known in decades. The answer, it turned out, was 97 days. That's how long it took for David and Ashley to finally show up at my door, together. It was a Thursday evening, the kind where the scent of freshly cut grass drifted in from my neighbor's yard, a normal sound in a normal neighborhood, where sons didn't exclude their fathers from Christmas dinner. When I opened the door, it wasn't the confident David I'd seen last December, or the polished Ashley who always had a dismissive air about her. This was a man and a woman who looked like they'd aged a decade in 3 months. David's expensive suit was wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes, the smell of desperation clinging to him like cheap cologne. Ashley, usually immaculate, had a tired slump to her shoulders, her perfect hair slightly disheveled. The sheen of Riverbend privilege had completely worn off. "Dad," David said, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper. "We need to talk." I stepped aside to let them in, noting how they looked around my house like they were seeing it for the first time. The new furniture I'd bought with my first mortgage-free paycheck. The fresh paint on walls that hadn't been updated in 8 years because every spare dollar had gone to their lifestyle. The repairs I'd finally been able to afford now that I wasn't subsidizing someone else's American dream. It was simple, certainly not a mansion, but it was mine. "Nice place," David said, quietly, almost in awe. "It's what happens when you spend money on yourself instead of people who don't appreciate it," I replied, settling into my new recliner, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Coffee?" They both shook their heads. Ashley perched on the edge of my couch like she was afraid to get comfortable, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. David stood awkwardly, shifting his weight. "Dad, I need you to know how sorry I am," David started, his voice cracking. "About everything. Christmas dinner, the newspaper article, the way the way we treated you." "Go on," I said, my gaze steady on him. "I didn't know about Richard planting that story. I swear I didn't," he said, running a hand through his already messy hair. "When I found out, Jesus, Dad, the things they said about you behind your back, the way they talked about our family, about Mom's memory." My jaw tightened at the mention of Clara, but I kept my voice level. "And what exactly did they say about your mother?" David flinched, unable to meet my eyes. "That she knew her place better than you knew yours, that she understood boundaries. They said she was just a house cleaner who got lucky." Ashley let out a small, choked sob beside him, her face buried in her hands. "I should have defended you," David continued, his voice thick with shame. "I should have stood up to them years ago." "Yes," I said simply. "You should have." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of 5 years of mistakes, of missed opportunities, of unspoken truths filling the space between us. Ashley finally lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed. "Mr. Hayes," she began, her voice soft, devoid of any pretense. I was wrong. About everything. About you, about Maria." She choked on Clara's name, the realization hitting her like a physical blow, just as her words had hit me months ago. I was so caught up in what my parents expected, in keeping up appearances. I honestly thought your money was just extra. I thought you didn't mind." Her voice was barely a whisper now. "I didn't realize how much you were sacrificing, how much we were taking." "The house is in foreclosure, Dad," David said, breaking the silence. "We can't make the payments without—" He stopped, seeming to realize how that sounded. "Without my help," I finished for him. "Without the money I was sending every month while you let your wife's family treat me like garbage." "I know how it looks," David said miserably. "Do you know how much money I sent you over 5 years?" I leaned forward, making sure he was looking at me. David nodded, defeated. "Ashley calculated it after Christmas. The mortgage payments, the down payment, everything else. Over $200,000. $237,468, I corrected. "I know the exact amount because I finally did something I should have done years ago. I added it up." Their faces crumpled. Ashley's silent tears flowed freely now. "Dad, I'm so sorry," David pleaded. "We don't know how to fix this." Ashley nodded, a desperate plea in her eyes. "You can't fix it, son," I said, not unkindly. "That money is gone. But more importantly, those years are gone. 5 years when I could have been building a real relationship with you instead of funding your wife's fantasy life." I know that now," David whispered, looking up at me with something that might have been a flicker of hope. "But maybe we could start over. Maybe there's a way to—" "Are you asking me to resume the mortgage payments?" I cut him off gently. The hope died in his eyes. We're going to lose everything, Dad. The house, Ashley's respect for me, her parents' approval. I don't know what I'll do." "You'll figure it out," I said. "The same way I figured out how to live without a son who respected me. The same way I learned to spend Christmas alone while you celebrated with people who thought I was beneath them." David started to cry then, quietly, like a man who'd run out of other options. Ashley reached over and took his hand, her own eyes still wet, but a new resolve starting to form on her face. This was real. This wasn't about public image anymore. It was about their very foundation. The answer, it turned out, was 97 days. That's how long it took for David and Ashley to finally show up at my door, together. It was a Thursday evening, the kind where the scent of freshly cut grass drifted in from my neighbor's yard. A normal sound in a normal neighborhood where sons didn't exclude their fathers from Christmas dinner. When I opened the door, it wasn't the confident David I'd seen last December, or the polished Ashley who always had a dismissive air about her. This was a man and a woman who looked like they'd aged a decade in 3 months. David's expensive suit was wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes, the smell of desperation clinging to him like cheap cologne. Ashley, usually immaculate, had a tired slump to her shoulders, her perfect hair slightly disheveled. The sheen of Riverbend privilege had completely worn off. "Dad," David said, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper, "we need to talk." I stepped aside to let them in, noting how they looked around my house like they were seeing it for the first time. The new furniture I'd bought with my first mortgage-free paycheck. The fresh paint on walls that hadn't been updated in 8 years because every spare dollar had gone to their lifestyle. The repairs I'd finally been able to afford now that I wasn't subsidizing someone else's American dream. It was simple, certainly not a mansion, but it was mine. "Nice place," David said, quietly, almost in awe. "It's what happens when you spend money on yourself instead of people who don't appreciate it," I replied, settling into my new recliner, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Coffee?" They both shook their heads. Ashley perched on the edge of my couch like she was afraid to get comfortable, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. David stood awkwardly, shifting his weight. "Dad, I need you to know how sorry I am," David started, his voice cracking. "About everything. Christmas dinner, the newspaper article, the way we treated you." "Go on," I said, my gaze steady on him. "I didn't know about Richard planting that story. I swear I didn't," he said, running a hand through his already messy hair. "When I found out, Jesus, Dad, the things they said about you behind your back, the way they talked about our family, about Mom's memory." My jaw tightened at the mention of Clara, but I kept my voice level. "And what exactly did they say about your mother?" David flinched, unable to meet my eyes. "That she knew her place better than you knew yours, that she understood boundaries. They said she was just a house cleaner who got lucky." Ashley let out a small, choked sob beside him, her face buried in her hands. "I should have defended you," David continued, his voice thick with shame. "I should have stood up to them years ago." "Yes," I said, simply, "you should have." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of 5 years of mistakes, of missed opportunities, of unspoken truths filling the space between us. Ashley finally lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed. "Mr. Hayes," she began, her voice soft, devoid of any pretense. I was wrong. About everything. About you. About Clara." She choked on Clara's name, the realization hitting her like a physical blow, just as her words had hit me months ago. I was so caught up in what my parents expected, in keeping up appearances. I honestly thought your money was just extra. I thought you didn't mind." Her voice was barely a whisper now. "I didn't realize how much you were sacrificing, how much we were taking." It was a raw, unfiltered admission, a far cry from the dismissive arrogance she usually wore. "The house is in foreclosure, Dad," David said, breaking the silence. "We can't make the payments without—" He stopped, seeming to realize how that sounded. "Without my help," I finished for him. "Without the money I was sending every month while you let your wife's family treat me like garbage." "I know how it looks," David said miserably. "Do you know how much money I sent you over 5 years?" I leaned forward, making sure he was looking at me. David nodded, defeated. "Ashley calculated it after Christmas. The mortgage payments, the down payment, everything else. Over $200,000. $237,468, I corrected. "I know the exact amount because I finally did something I should have done years ago. I added it up." Their faces crumpled. Ashley's silent tears flowed freely now. "Dad, I'm so sorry," David pleaded. "We don't know how to fix this." Ashley nodded, a desperate plea in her eyes. This wasn't the shallow regret of losing comfort, but the profound pain of realizing they had lost something infinitely more valuable. "You can't fix it, son," I said, not unkindly. "That money is gone. But more importantly, those years are gone. 5 years when I could have been building a real relationship with you instead of funding your wife's fantasy life." I know that now," David whispered, looking up at me with something that might have been a flicker of hope. "But maybe we could start over. Maybe there's a way to—" "Are you asking me to resume the mortgage payments?" I cut him off gently. The hope died in his eyes. We're going to lose everything, Dad. The house, Ashley's respect for me, her parents' approval. I don't know what I'll do."
"You'll figure it out," I said. "The same way I figured out how to live without a son who respected me. The same way I learned to spend Christmas alone while you celebrated with people who thought I was beneath them." David started to cry then, quietly, like a man who'd run out of other options. Ashley reached over and took his hand, her own eyes still wet, but a new resolve starting to form on her face. This was real. This wasn't about public image anymore. It was about their very foundation. "I lost you, didn't I?" David had whispered, his voice choked with tears. "I chose them over you, and now I've lost you forever." I watched him for a long moment. This man I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, who let his wife's family convince him that his own father wasn't good enough for their company. My heart ached, but it wasn't the old, familiar ache of betrayal. It was a quieter, sadder kind of pain, the kind that comes from watching someone you care about finally face the consequences of their own making. "David," I said finally, my voice steady, "you didn't lose me. You gave me away. There's a difference." Ashley, still holding his hand, looked up at me, a silent understanding passing between us. She was starting to get it. "Is there any chance, any way you could forgive me?" he asked, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I forgave you months ago," I said, and I meant it. The anger had burned itself out, replaced by a quiet resolve and, surprisingly, a sense of peace. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. It doesn't mean pretending this didn't happen, or that I'm going to resume paying for a lifestyle that came with the condition that I be grateful for scraps of your attention. "Then what does it mean?" David asked, his voice raw. I stood up and walked to my mantel, where Clara's photo sat next to a new picture. It was me with my niece Rosa and her family at Easter dinner. The first holiday I'd spent with people who actually wanted me there. People who genuinely laughed at my jokes and asked about my day, not my bank balance. "It means that if you want a relationship with me, you'll have to build it from scratch," I told him, turning back. "It means showing me respect instead of demanding I earn it. It means making choices based on what's right, not what's convenient."
The pause, letting my words sink in. Ashley had let go of David's hand and was listening intently, a thoughtful, almost solemn expression on her face. This wasn't the old Ashley, obsessed with appearances. This was someone facing down a very real, very ugly reality. And it means that the next time someone, your wife, her parents, anyone, tries to exclude me from family gatherings, you'll remember who actually acts like family. David nodded slowly, understanding perhaps for the first time that respect wasn't something you could take for granted. Ashley also nodded, a subtle, almost imperceptible dip of her head, but it was there. "The house," David said quietly, "isn't my problem anymore." I sat back down, feeling lighter than I had in years. "You're a grown man, David, you and Ashley. Figure it out like grown adults do. Get jobs that pay enough to cover your bills. Sell the house and buy something you can afford. Stop living beyond your means and expecting other people to subsidize your choices." Ashley actually looked up at me directly, a flicker of something in her eyes, understanding perhaps, or even a nascent respect. She didn't argue, she just listened. David stood up slowly, his shoulders straighter than they'd been in months. He walked to the door, then turned back, an unexpected vulnerability in his eyes. "Dad, for what it's worth, seeing you stand up for yourself at Christmas dinner, I was proud of you. Embarrassed and angry, but proud too." Ashley, still by the couch, echoed his sentiment, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "He's right, Arthur. It was humbling. And seeing you so calm, it made us realize a lot." "Good," I said. "Maybe there's hope for you yet." They nodded, a shared, silent acknowledgement, and then, for the first time in a long time, they left my home without an argument, without a demand, just a quiet, respectful departure. The silence after they closed the door wasn't empty. It was full of possibilities.
Their path to recovery would be long and hard, but for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine effort in their eyes. They had chosen to face the music, together. After they left, I poured myself a glass of the good whiskey, the one I used to save for special occasions. Tonight felt special enough, and not because of them, but because of me. I stepped onto my back porch, the screen door creaking just a little, a sound I finally had the money to fix. Spring was truly coming to Riverbend, the trees beginning to bud, the air warming with promise. In 4 months, I'd be 63. Clara had been gone for 8 years. I'd wasted 5 of those years being a doormat for people who didn't appreciate sacrifice, who saw me as nothing more than a source of funds. I wasn't planning to waste any more. Life, it turns out, keeps moving, with or without your permission. Richard and Eleanor Sterling tried to salvage their reputation, but the gossip from that Christmas dinner spread like wildfire through the Riverbend social scene. Their connections turned out to be fair-weather friends, quick to distance themselves from a public scandal. Richard's golf buddies suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Eleanor's charity events saw a sharp decline in attendance. Their lavish lifestyle became a mockery, and the whispers about their true financial state, exposed by my little presentation, grew louder. They eventually sold their sprawling estate, downsizing to a modest condo across town. I didn't gloat, but I noted it. Justice, in its quiet, unassuming way, had a knack for finding its mark.
Generate a standard American English accent for this story. The voice should be from a middle-aged male with a deep, resonant, calm, confident, and warm tone. The reading pace should be 115% faster than normal, yet remain natural and articulate, as if someone is engaging in a direct conversation while storytelling. The voice must convey sincerity, depth, and profound empathy for the historical experiences and struggles of the Black community, expressing both an understanding of pain and an unyielding resilience. When reaching sections that are calls to action, use a bold and powerful intonation. Specifically, when describing moments of triumph and overcoming adversity, the voice should become bright and full of pride, highlighting the transformation from vulnerability to strength, clearly conveying a sense of victory and jubilation. Throughout the narrative, the voice must maintain an evocative quality, as if a wise and experienced individual is sharing invaluable lessons. This should create a personal, intimate connection while remaining authoritative and trustworthy. Incorporate meaningful pauses at key points to allow listeners to reflect and fully absorb the message, ensuring they remain engaged from beginning to end. As for David and Ashley, their journey was just beginning. They lost the Riverbend house, of course, couldn't make the payments, couldn't get another loan with their credit now in tatters. It was tough watching them pack up, moving into a small rental house on the other side of town. But it was also necessary. David found a new job, a steady one, even if it didn't come with a corner office. Ashley, to my surprise, started working part-time at a local boutique, learning what it meant to earn $1 instead of just spending them. They had to sell most of their expensive furniture, the luxury cars. They were starting over, from scratch, just like I had all those years ago. And you know what? They showed up every Sunday for dinner at my place. Not with gifts, not with excuses, but with a quiet willingness to learn, to listen, to rebuild. David started talking to me, really talking, about his day, his challenges, his hopes. Ashley even started asking for my kind of cooking recipes, genuinely curious. They realized that real family wasn't about the size of your house or the brand of your car, but about showing up for each other, about honesty, about genuine respect. They had to learn the hard way that integrity, the foundation of any good life, was something you couldn't buy, and once lost, it was incredibly hard to earn back. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot. There were still awkward silences, moments when I could see the old habits creeping in. But they were trying, and trying, in my book, counted for a lot. My phone buzzed with a text from Rosa, my niece. "Dinner Sunday. The kids want to show you their school projects." I smiled and typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." Real family, it turned out, was something you built with people who actually wanted you there, who celebrated who you were, calluses and all. Everything else was just expensive theater, and I was done buying tickets to shows where I wasn't welcome on stage. The whiskey tasted like freedom,
And the future, for the first time in a very long time, looked exactly as bright as I was willing to make it. And that, I realized, was the most profound lesson of all. The story of Arthur Hayes, of David and Ashley, isn't just about money or a family squabble. It's a powerful reminder that true wealth isn't measured in square footage or designer labels, but in self-respect and the genuine connections we forge. For years, Arthur allowed himself to be diminished, to be an ATM with inconvenient emotions, because he believed that was the price of keeping his family close. He learned the hard way that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself, and even for others, is to draw a firm line in the sand. When respect is absent and exploitation becomes the norm, silence is no longer an option. It takes courage to stand up, to reclaim your worth, and to expose the truth, especially when that truth is uncomfortable for those you love. But the story also holds a profound lesson about forgiveness and redemption. David and Ashley, initially blinded by privilege and external validation, were forced to confront the wreckage of their choices. Their journey from arrogance to genuine remorse wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't instant. It took losing everything they valued superficially to realize the true cost of their actions. Their willingness to humble themselves, to apologize sincerely, and to begin rebuilding their lives and their relationship with Arthur from scratch speaks volumes about the human capacity for change. It reminds us that while consequences are inevitable, the path to healing and growth is always open for those willing to walk it with integrity. What did you take away from Arthur's journey? Have you ever had to draw a line in a difficult relationship or witnessed someone bravely reclaim their self-worth? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. If this story resonated with you, give it a like to help more people find it, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful narratives about resilience, unexpected turns, and the incredible journey of personal transformation. May your own foundations be built on respect, honesty, and genuine connection. Take care, and here's to finding your peace.